is Leon Bailey. I'm the first African American to integrate a Navy wrestling team in 1963. In 1964, I became the first African American to win a New England State Championship. In 1965, I became the first African American to coach a Navy wrestling team. I am a two-time Navy wrestling champion. I was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2017. I have been selected as one of Baltimore's African American heroes and sheroes, and also selected as one of Baltimore's sports legends. My wrestling career started right here at McKim Center. McKim Center is really located, for some that don't know, is located in East Baltimore, on Baltimore Street in the 1100 block of East Baltimore Street, not too far from the United States Post Office. The post office is on Fair Street and McKim is on Baltimore Street. And this is where I really began becoming interested in wrestling. I moved up from Cherry Hill and lived right down the street from McKim, and it was a new recreation center to me. And coming here, they had just started a wrestling team. They just started a wrestling team, and when I was introduced to it, and what I saw, hey, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to try out for the wrestling team. You know, and the coach, he was new too, believe it or not. He was a new coach in wrestling, and I was new to wrestling. But again, it all started here at McKim. And this is really where I was introduced to wrestling. And during that period of time that I was introduced, this also was the time that I really was basically introduced to the segregation and the prejudice in Baltimore coming from Cherry Hill. McKim, when I first came to McKim, I didn't realize that blacks were only allowed in this building, believe it or not, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays. And listen to this, if you came into this building on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night, that's the only nights that we had. But if you came in here on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, which was white nights, then you might have to fight your way out of here, or you was going to be in trouble because it was your night. That was the segregation that we had to face, the bigotry that we had to face, not only in McKim, but right up the street in Patterson Park. Right up the street in Patterson Park was the same way. You know, it was all, blacks weren't allowed. Negroes weren't allowed in certain places. You knew, believe it or not, where to go and where not to go. You knew at the time you could not swim in the pool at Patterson Park. Another side of Baltimore was Gwen Oak Park. Gwen Oak Park was another one where they didn't allow blacks to come into the park. So there was a lot of segregation, there was a lot of bigotry, but being here at McKim really started my wrestling career. And I went from McKim to Carver High School. 1955 is where I started wrestling here at McKim. If you look at these steps, here, this is where we ran. We ran inside this building from one side to the other side, back up and back around, and that's what's part of our exercise. And our coach, Royce Ennis, he came from Texas. If I remember correctly, he came from Texas, and he became our wrestling coach. And becoming our wrestling coach, I remember going to places like Dundalk, Spurs Point, Middle River, and during that period of time, early 1955, the early 60s, I could hear them say, we went out to Dundalk, places like that, and then you could hear, no niggas, no niggas. They would let you know that you were not wanted. Yeah, I tell you, man, those conditioning exercises that we used to have at Carver for wrestling, we used to run up and down the stairways, up and down the halls, but we come into the wrestling room itself, it was, the push-ups, the set-ups, the jumping jacks, the wrestling, chain wrestling with one another. Back and forth, and we had our coach Charlie Robinson. He was very stressful with being in condition. Also, while I was at Carver, I ran cross country. I ran cross country also, and outside of Carver, I also boxed. I boxed. So during that period of time that I was at Carver, I wrestled, boxed, and ran cross country. I played 3 sports while I was there. Yes, Coach Charlie Robinson. Let me tell you a little bit about Charlie Robinson. He was a phys ed coach, phys ed teacher, and coach. He also coached football, But one thing about Coach Charlie Robinson, I'm talking about wrestling now, in the wrestling room. I remember, again, he used to stress being in conditioning and working as a team, everybody as a team. This was a team effort. But I remember also that when you wasn't working as a team and you did something that wasn't team-like, he had a paddle like this called Baby Brother. And one thing that you didn't want to do, man, you didn't want Baby Brother to touch you. Because that meant that you was doing something wrong and you needed to get in shape. That was Coach Robinson. Coach Robinson is still living today. He's in his early 90s. And if it wasn't for Coach Robinson being my wrestling coach, I don't really know how I would have made it in the Navy wrestling.
My name is Charlie Robinson. I came to call from Booker T to teach a physical education coach. And I was fortunate enough to come there in 1951 or 52 to Carver. And I stayed there until 1960 something, 65 or something. And I was a football coach, wrestling and baseball at Carver. And I run across Leon in the wrestling room. And about Leon, he became what I want to call it, all-purpose man. Ever what weight that we needed for a particular match. I'll say he was 135 or 40 pounds, I don't remember which. But if I asked him to go up to 150, he would do that. If he was 140, asked him to come down to 130, he would do that. He was actually the primary, he was my Renaissance man. And he balanced it out for many championships. In many dual meets that we were able to meet at Carver. I think we had 3 or 4 wrestling championships while I was there. And Leon was the backbone of it all because he would move any way that we did to fill in a spot that was needed. And I adopted him years ago as my adopted son. And he's always been very diligent, very, how can I put it, religious, and he's very well, and he's a very likely person, one that you love to have around you, and I'm proud to call him my son, because that's how that I look at him, and he's been in my life for till now, and I think that we were just exchanging ages here a minute ago. I'll be 96 in a couple of months, and he's telling me what his age was. I say he's a young man yet. He's got far to go, and I'm always glad to hear from him, glad to see him, glad to talk with him, because he's actually an inspiration to me, as well as some other kids that I was able to run into at Carver and other places that I've taught and worked.
Right here.
What year was that?
Oh, that had to be 60, see, 59, 60, something like that. Somewhere around there. Because it came out in 62. This is the varsity team.
Yeah.
Larry Brown, Cornbread,
Yeah.
Slappy. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a good team. We had a good wrestling team.
Yeah. It's
you know,
Larry, yeah.
no, Larry's right there. Larry Brown.
Yeah, that was the thing that when Carver broke the mold at wrestling in the city. In other words, the for lack of a better term, the colored teams didn't participate in wrestling until Carver got into it. And we won 3 or 4 championships and was always in contention there because we had a lot of dedicated people. And back at that time, for example, when I'd go down to the Naval Academy to watch practice, I couldn't go down on the floor. The white coaches could. And so what we did, I'd had books and things like that, and had the kids to go through certain holes and things like that. And we became a terror to the other schools. And in other words, at the time, Carver may have had 600 or 700 boys, if that many, total. And we ended up competing on an A conference. That's what Poly and City, and they had 2,000 kids. And one thing that I remember, straying off here just a little, George Young, who was a coach of City College, football coach, and he ended up being the general manager of the New York Giants. He just died recently. He just been inducted in the Hall of Fame recently, just coming holiday. And what the tribute that he made towards me, and it was because of the boys, that I was one football coach he couldn't beat. And that was a tribute that I like. And it's the same thing about wrestling. Everybody, when Carver came, they knew they was in for a fight.
That's right.
Thing like that. They knew they was in for a fight. And that time, Gilman and McDonald and sitting party would dominate until these boys. And this is why that one of the things that I taught my kids, and one of the things that my father always taught me, was that we weren't better than anyone, but nobody was any better than us. And we would always do what we would always practice. And what we did in wrestling, which was a new thing, we scouted. In other words, for example, if a kid was weak on his feet, we'd show him how to wrestle on his knees. What was her name? She was at your thing, induction into Hall of Fame. Phyllis Rudebar.
Oh, Phyllis Rubin.
Yeah,
Phyllis Rubin.
Yeah, she was in business, and she would take shorthand at wrestling matches. And when on Monday, she would have that with me, and I'd give them what they need to work on there. And another thing that we did at Carver, and another thing I attribute to Leon as well, each wrestler had to find somebody to replace him. In other words, he'd go to the hall, and I'd give them 15 minutes to work with that person. So that's why we always stayed strong. In other words, Leon had a little brother, somebody coming along to take his place. And so that's what we did. And we took all the eye out of wrestling. And it was always a team thing. And everybody worked for each other, pulled for each other, and everything else. And that's the thing that I really appreciate. Another thing about wrestling is this, to me. It's one of the greatest sports going, for the reason you couldn't wrestle out of your weight class. And so you had to wrestle in your weight class. And so if you weighed 140 pounds, just like in football, if I'm got to face somebody weighing 300 pounds, I weigh 180. Or basketball, if you're 6'6", and I'm 5'4", you got a particular advantage. But wrestling is one that equalized everything. And these kids would thrive on that. And these kids at Carver, and Leon and I was just talking about, just like with him becoming a publisher, I'm proud of him for that. But we have kids from Carver that got their PhDs, lawyers, judges, teachers, preachers, you name it. And so I'm so proud to have been in their lives, to go on, the number of kids that's gone on to college. But I'm just as proud of the ones who made a success out of their life. And I always say this, that everybody don't need to go to college. It's not their interest. But if they find something they love to do, and they follow up on it. And that's why that even today, Leon knows this, is a lot of these kids every day, contact me and things of that nature. And as I say, they're the ones that keep me young and keep me posted and things like that. They call, come by, and wish me well. And that's my tribute to the sports world, in particular to Carver.
This is baby brother. Look like he has grown a little bit, because when we were wrestling at Carver, and Coach Robinson used to have baby brother, but it was a little smaller baby brother than this. But that's what kept us in control a little bit. If we got out of order, we wasn't practicing like we should have, we might get baby brother and have to stand in the corner for a little bit.
They just putting all this on me. This was just to keep me in line, that's all.
That Carver wasn't getting the equipment like most of the other schools, like City, Poly, Gilman. Even Gilman was a private school, but we weren't getting the equipment that we needed as far as wrestling and other sports in the school until Coach Robinson, he protested, to the extent of why we couldn't get the necessary equipment that we needed for our sports at Carver. In reference to the educational system, as the coach and I was talking about, that Carver was a gold mine, but a treasure, but people didn't take advantage of the treasure because of the education system that we had at Carver. we had trades. We had all kind of trades that I was in carpentry. And right now, I can still do some carpentry work. You know, while I was in school, we used to have jobs after school. You know, whatever trade that you was in. You know, you had shoemaking, you had dressmaking, you had tailoring, you had bricklaying, we had in electrical work. We had all those trades at Carver, and then someone decided to change the educational system differently, and now you can see that problem of changing it around to the extent that the students don't have skilled trades, and if they had skilled trades, they would be on some job instead of standing on a corner. Every student or every student is not going to go to college. We need skilled trades. That's what these young people need. You know, and I go back to 1959 when I entered Carver. I went into carpentry and cabinet making. That's what I did. That's what I did. That was the trade, and I can still do it. Yeah, my boxing started with a friend of mine, Robert Stokes. He was boxing, and he mentioned to me, Leon, won't you come to the gym with me one day? So I took a chance and going to Mr. Mack's gym, located Broadway and Igor Street, and really was over top what they call a grocery store. They call it the American store, really. And Mr. Mack's gym was on the second floor. And meeting Mr. Mack and watching my friend, Robert Stokes, boxing and training, and before I knew it, the next day or a couple of days later, I was getting my own boxing gear to train at the gym. And being with Mr. Mack, it was like being away from home. Mr. Mack he took all his fighters in like a family. It was a family type gym, if I can use that terminology. Because I didn't, I didn't have a father, I had a father, but didn't really know him. And Mr. Mack just treated us all like his children. But I boxed with Mr. Mack in 1957 is when I started boxing for Mr. Mack. I boxed with Mr. Mack from 1957 to 1962. And I boxed at 147 pounds. I was a welterweight at that time. And I boxed for Mr. Mack till 1962 before I went into the Navy. I also before I went into the Navy, I was supposed to sign a professional contract with Mr. Mack, but I wanted to box and wrestle for the United States Navy. In 1963 is when I started wrestling for the United States Navy at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, Quonset Point Naval Air Station. Not too far really from Providence, Rhode Island, just up the road a little bit. But I wrestled under Commander Josiah Henson. Actually, a white commander. But he didn't look at my color. During that period of time, 1962, 63, that racism, that segregation was still there. And
he didn't look at my color. He looked at me as a wrestler. He looked at me as a human being, someone that made the wrestling team. I was the only Negro on the team at that time. And during the time of my enlistment, there were a lot of Negroes going into the Navy because of the fact that a lot of Negroes going into the Navy were geared to being stewards, cleaning up officers' quarters, or being in the mess part of the ship, So there were a lot of Negroes going into the Navy during that time. And again, I went in for the purpose of wrestling for the Navy. February 1964 is when I wrestled in the New England State Wrestling Tournament held at Quonset Point Naval Air Station. And some of the teams that were there were Harvard, Brown University, New York Athletic Club, Springfield Wrestling Club, and many other local wrestling clubs around that area during that time. In this tournament, wrestling in the New England State Tournament, my first match that I wrestled and actually busted my knee up. The first match, injured my knee and had to wrestle 4 more matches. And as the evening went on, the injury that I had to my knee, I went in for a takedown, and that's how I hurt my knee. I busted my knee up. But I kept on wrestling, even though the coaches, my coach and officials wanted to find out whether or not it was okay for me to continue to wrestle. Well, I continued to wrestle, and as I kept wrestling, the leg or the knee got worse. It puffed up on me, but I kept wrestling. I wanted to wrestle. It was a tournament, and I didn't want to forfeit. So at the 5th match, I wrestled 5 matches. I wrestled 5 matches with a busted knee. And the 5th match, which was the wrestle-off, the officials again was concerned about my knee because I was, hopping on the mat because my knee was sore, was busted up. And they asked me, did I want to continue to wrestle? And I said yes, because if I had said no, then I forfeit the match. And I went out and wrestled the match and pinned my opponent. And that made me the champion for that weight class, 136 pounds. So I wrestled 5 matches with an injured knee. And with that injured knee, when I won the tournament, and when they raised my hand up to be a winner, that's when all the emotions came out to the extent that, it was tears flowing, because I thought about the injury that I had and what I had to go through on that wrestling team. The only black on that wrestling team. After winning the New England State Wrestling Championship with an injured knee, a couple weeks later, I had an invitation from the United States Olympic Committee for the trials that was held in New York. But I was unable to go because of the injury that I had received in the wrestling tournament at Quonset Point, Rhode Island. But the good news was that I became the first black coach for the United States Navy in 1965, and that was because my commanding officer, Josiah Henson, was promoted to captain, and he had to leave, and we were without a coach. So Commander Henson recommended to my commanding officer that I be the next wrestling coach for the Navy team, wrestling team at Quonset Point Naval Air Station.
This is the trophy that I won in the New England State Championship in 1964. And also had an invitation to the 64 Olympic trials because of winning the first place trophy. This trophy here is the trophy that I won while coaching for the United States Navy in 1965. It's the Norland National Wrestling, Navy Wrestling Championship, 1965. This is my award from the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, 2017, Outstanding American.
I grew up in Cherry Hill. Cherry Hill was built in the early 40s, and it was built primarily for Negro servicemen coming home. And Cherry Hill was one of the first public projects built in Baltimore City for servicemen. And during that period of time, as I remember what my mom telling me about Cherry Hill, that Cherry Hill was a wonderful place. I remember when I was living there, it was self-contained, if I can use that word, to the extent that it had its own shopping center. In that shopping center, it was a grocery store, the A&P, it was A&P, but I didn't realize until as I got older what that A&P meant. It was American Pacific grocery stores that were all over the United States, and I didn't know because I was young at the time. But we had, in that shopping center, we had our barber shop, we had a hardware store, we had a shoe store, laundromat, a little curry out, and we had our own movie there. We had our own movie there, which the name of the movie was The Hill Movie. The Hill Movie, and on the weekends, they had serial movies such as Superman, Batman, Roy Rogers, and we look forward to going to the movie. We only had to pay, believe it or not, during that period of time, 10 cents to get into the movie. Can you believe that? 10 cents to get into the movie. But again, Cherry Hill was a wonderful place. I mean, really wonderful, where it was also built for low-income families, you know, at that time, you know. And my mother, living in Cherry Hill, she was a single parent, and she did domestic work, and it was really hard for my mom to support the family, me and my brothers and my sisters there. You know, she had to work, you know, sometimes 2-3 times a day just cleaning houses to support us. And I just can't but say how wonderful she was. to be able to do that and the many sacrifices that she had to make for us. Let me tell you something else about Cherry Hill. There was, low-income families there, and some families like mine didn't really have money all the time. But there was Mr. Logan. Mr. Logan had a bus, and it was a grocery bus, believe it or not, that rode around Cherry Hill. And some families could get groceries off the bus and get credit. Some of you may not know, but there's credit on the book. So if you didn't have the money, Mr. Logan would let you have the money, let you have your groceries until you were able to pay. And that was really helpful for a lot of us. And another thing about Cherry Hill, Cherry Hill itself, the name Cherry Hill, came about because of the area where Cherry Hill was located, in that southern part of Baltimore. And being in Cherry Hill, it was, like I said, self-contained. How close-knit families were. They were very close to that in that period of time, because we could depend, different families could depend on one another. Again, everybody didn't have, families weren't that well off, so they helped one another. When one family needed something, and the other family would help out. And that would be, I'm just going to use this as an example. Let's say my family would need some flour or some sugar or something like that, or the other family, then we could go and knock on Miss Johnson's door. Miss Johnson, my mom sent me over there. Could you help us with some sugar or something like that, And it was really close-knit, It's not like today. It's not like today, you're kind of hesitant today to speak to anybody that you don't know. But when we was, like I say, when we lived in Cherry Hill, we had that close-knit with all the families and the relationships there. Yeah, when I heard about the assassination for President Kennedy, I was working in C Officers Club at Quonset Point Naval Air Station, and it was on television. It came on. It was a special, and if I remember correctly, it was Walter Cronkite, if I'm saying this right, that came on television and explained that President Kennedy was assassinated. And I was doing work, and at the time, I just had to stop everything. I had to stop everything and listen to what was going on and what had happened. And, I'm like, how could this happen? Is this real? Is this real? And just listening to the broadcast at that time, because a lot of information was still being gathered on who did it, who was involved, and all that, So that's all I can really remember. I was at the Quonset Point, like I say, Quonset Point Naval Air Station. Yeah, 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated, I was working at Western Electric Supply, telephone company, and I was working the 4 to 12 shift, 4 to 12. And I was, and that night when I was working, got the word from one of the employees that Dr. King was assassinated. And it seemed like everything stopped. Everything stopped on the job at that time, wondering what was going on. Some people went into where we had our rec room and was looking at television and hearing the reports that he had got killed, that was assassinated. But what happened after that, I got off the job, and it seemed like the whole city was in an uproar, you know, in an uproar, and that some people really upset, and this is when we had some rioting, looting and burning of businesses in our own community, at this time, with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, so and people was just so upset. It's like didn't know what to do, and it seemed like it was also a revenge type thing, and if I can use that terminology, to the extent of the segregation and the prejudice during that period of time, and Dr. King with his nonviolent protest movement, that he is a man that was killed, preaching nonviolence, So naturally, people got upset. And I'm not saying what they did was right, but they did it. I'm a Vietnam vet. I served during the era of Vietnam, but I didn't have the privilege of, I say, serving over in Vietnam. I understood the reason why a lot of people was demonstrating during that period of time of Vietnam, to the extent of why were we there, what was the reason for being there, and it was not really nothing laid out concrete for good reason for us being in Vietnam. And being in Vietnam caused a lot of demonstrations, a lot of mixed feelings among people, to the extent burning their draft card, some leaving the United States to go to Canada, not to serve or not to be able to be drafted. I had to take my hat off to my comrades, all those that served in Vietnam, all those that served and, that their lives were taken, and we need to honor and never forget their service. Yeah, being here at McKim, when I was wrestling here at McKim, I was kind of like a little muscular. And when I went out to wrestle, most of the time I thought about just pinning somebody, But when I left McKim and started wrestling in high school, I became a little bit more wiser. I learned a little bit more about wrestling, and that helped me out a lot. And also when I went from wrestling at Carver to wrestling for United States Navy, I became smarter. I knew how to wrestle near the end of the match, so if anything happened, then I would go off the mat, and then the match would have to stop, and then we had to bring us back to the center of the mat and wrestle smart. Not for a pin, but to win. That's the whole key.